Welcome to JMR Talks. Today we will discuss about India's growth strategy. Whether India should go for a service sector led growth or more and more emphasis has to be laid on the industrial development. Recently, the former Reserve Bank of India Governor Raghuram Rajan Garu was saying that India should focus on exporting what are called services. That means export led growth in the service sector should be the what are called focus. Now, as we could see in the recent past, the service sector has become the largest and the fastest growing. When we look at the contribution of different sectors, agriculture, manufacturing, and service, in the 60s, agriculture used to contribute more than 50%, and then what are called manufacturing and what are called service sector. But today, the reverse got the trend got reversed with service sector contributing more than 51%. So today you can look at it, 51% of the GDP is contributed by service sector, followed by manufacturing and agri. Now when we look at the what called trade, the share of service sector, which used to be only 6.5% somewhere in 90s, now it rose to what called 24%. But some people could say it's a what called happy development because service sector is growing. So employment also what growing, the country is growing, economic development is taking place. No. The relative increase in the service sector what called share in the GDP is not commensurate with the increase in employment. That means service sector failed to provide employment to the extent of its growth in terms of contribution to GDP. Okay, fine. What is the issue? Most of the shift that has taken place from agriculture has cornered by service sector only. That means the increased share in the GDP has been usurped from agriculture by the service sector, but manufacturing share more or less remained the same. Now this happens mostly in high income countries, not in developing countries like what called India. Now if you look at the kind of employment provided, a major chunk of the what called employment is by way of outsourcing. In other words, the activities which were internally being undertaken by the manufacturing now are being what called outsourced, and people might what called look at it as if service sector is what called creating additional employment as such. Now one most important thing we all need to remember is that growth of the country and development of the people are not what called independent. They have to be dependent. Both need to what called growth together. When the country is growing, the people also what called should develop. Now let's look at the service sector and the extent of job creation by the service. As we all know, in an economy we have three sectors: agriculture, manufacturing, service. We call it as primary, secondary, and tertiary. When we look at the contribution of service sector in the GDP, which was 29.54% in 50-51, rose to 54.27 by 2021 in the gross value added. In 90s, it used to what I call provide employment to the 1/4 of workforce. Okay, but now it's I think even 1/3 of what I call this is. In other words, the increased share of service sector is not being what I call getting reflected in terms of job creation by the service sector. Now, what is this concept of surplus sector? Okay, now Ajit Premji University, they brought out a paper wherein they classify the service sector into what I call three. One is surplus sector, social sector, and the new services sector. Now, if you look at broad, the service sector, you have trade, repairs, hotels, restaurant, etc. Now, most of them, they provide low skilled or low income what called jobs. On the other hand, financial services, which is part of the service sector, provides employment to educated and what called skilled persons. But if you look at the contribution of what called financial services to overall output of service sector, it's negligible as such. And one more thing is that in this surplus sector, that is part of the services sector, people have what I call low fallback option in terms of employment opportunities in manufacturing or what I call agriculture, and significantly more than half of the what I call employment provided by the service sector is in the surplus sector. In other words, most of the employment generated either is in the unorganized sector or in the low earnings. In other words, while service sector definitely contributing more than 50% of the GDP, but it failed to provide employment to that extent to the people. Fine. So when we all agree that a service-led growth is not sustainable, even if you go by growth history also, we find that most of the developed countries, they had a strong base in what is called manufacturing. Subsequently, service sector took over. That's a different thing. But a question might arise as to why we need to stress manufacturing, or why we should focus on growth of manufacturing or industry. As we can see, the service sector can mostly employ what are called uneducated or undereducated. Fine. Now, the high growth in the what are called manufacturing sector leads to what are called economic development in terms of its what are called positive linkages to the agriculture. When industry develops, modern inputs are what are called made available to the agriculture. So the productivity what are called in agriculture will go up. When the productivity and the farm income goes up, the taxes in terms of revenue to the government what are called goes up. So in terms of its positive linkages, backward linkages and all that, it's all the more important for a country like India to focus on manufacturing growth. The importance of manufacturing or industry can be gauged from the fact that in terms of the sustainable development goals, the goal number 9 is on industrial development. Now that shows the key role industry plays in the economic development of a country. What more? Now when we look at all the three sectors, primary, secondary and what we call tertiary, we find that most of the innovation and the technological developments are taking place in what we call manufacturing. And in terms of its strong linkages to other parts of the economy, manufacturing sector can what we call spur the growth overall of the country as such. And one more thing, once the what I call manufacturing sector starts growing, then there will be what I call demand for what I call highly skilled jobs. So there will be pressure on what I call education and what I call training. So those two sectors also will pick up. While some could say that industrial development might cause environmental hazards, but thanks to the what I call new development and the technological advancement and that are taking place, I am sure environmental concerns would not be of what I call much issue. Now, Paul Krugman, the Nobel laureate in economics, he said, if India has to become a superpower, if India has to become a developed country, there is no other goal except to provide jobs to its youth. We have seen that today the youth constitute a major chunk of the total workforce. Unless until we are in a position to provide gainful employment to these youngsters, they will not be able to add to the gross domestic product of the whatever country. So what India need to do is that it should focus more on the manufacturing while allowing the vertical service sector growth. Now government has already taken some steps like what are called Made in India, Skill India campaign and all that. Though the progress is not that good and all that, I'm sure in terms of ease of doing business, we are doing well. So when India as a country could provide a supporting environment in terms of infrastructure, in terms of improved human capital, their capability, and an enabling regime, I'm sure that manufacturing growth will will pick up, and thereby laying a strong foundation for the economic development of the country. So in conclusion, so I would like to say that we can't separate growth of a country from the economic development of the country. So both have to go together. So mere service sector led growth will not be sustainable as service sector failed to provide employment opportunities. And in terms of Paul Krugman's statement, unless until we provide jobs, we as a country cannot develop. So let's hope that in the times to come, our country will focus more and more on developing what we call manufacturing sector whose growth will spur the economic development of the country. Thank you.